Okay, I met you. Do you remember when we first met? Was it 2016,
I think
2017?
it might have been 17, 18. I came to Toronto because and still to this day, this is correct, I was so moved by your lectures and your videos that they significantly changed my life. And I really wanted to meet you more than anything else. And
Yeah,
so
yeah. Well, I remember
you were kind
that.
enough to make time for that.
Yeah, well, I remember that meeting. You know, I remember trying to figure out who you were because of what you were doing and the fact that you had this remarkable organizational capacity. But what I'm interested in now is what I'm very interested in trying to figure out what inclined you to take the path that you took. Now, you said, okay, so you said Obama, but you said something else at the same time. You said that you had been reading American history, okay, and that you were concerned with, interested in, and convinced by, I suppose, all of those, this issue of what made America great.
Correct.
Okay, so now, so this is interesting and worth taking apart. For decades, the typical pathway for someone young who was assessing the history of his or her country would have been to read it through a highly critical lens. So, for example, I remember when I was 13 or 14, I was reading Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. They were more like radical literary figures, I would say. But the mid-70s ethos certainly was to read history, sociology, critically. And I don't mean you were being uncritical. I mean to take an anti-establishment stance.
Yes.
Like in the 60s, that was all, well, anti-establishment, free love, the sexual revolution is coming, everyone's going to be free. By the time the 70s came along, which was the milieu I was embedded in, all of the optimism of the 60s had pretty much vanished. Now you, though, interestingly enough, in Chicago, and this would be mid-2000s. So
Be
quite
2000
a bit
to
later.
2009.
Right, near the end of the the first decade of the 2000s. You were reading American history, but your take was positive and patriotic.
Correct.
So why? Why do you think that was? Like, what do you think what made you different? Why do you think that your political rebellion took a conservative form?
Yes.
When it's not common for young people, and it certainly wasn't the pattern of the time from, say, 1965 till about when you
Correct.
were adolescent.
That's a phenomenal analysis and question. Let me just add to it. The literature, the non-political, non-historical literature that we were being assigned was what I call pre-woke. It was almost there. And so it was like books that come to mind is a book called like Things Fall Apart. Basically, the entire premise of the book, based on my memory, is that there are this wonderful tribe and they all get along in Africa, and these evil colonialists come in and things fall apart and there's internal strife. And the end of the book is basically the summary of all of these relationships of these evil colonialists that say, and here's the history of just the sub-Saharan Africa, basically dismissing all of the complexities and the beauties. The discussions we'd have in class were very much anti-colonialist, anti-Western, that we are the contaminants on the world, that we are polluting other tribes. And again, mind you, that we're in 8th or 9th grade discussing this. So I don't know what post-structuralism is or postmodernism is, but it was pre-woke.
Did you spend any of the time when you were studying slavery assessing the fact that the UK was the only country that's ever existed in the history of the world that spent, 2 centuries and a tremendous proportion of its treasury eradicating slavery around the world at the behest of Protestant Christians?
Correct.
Because that's the story.
And I never remember knowing the name Wilberforce.
Wilberforce, yeah. See, this is a very interesting thing. I actually didn't come across, this is so strange, but life is very strange. I didn't come across the name Wilberforce till I was probably in my 40s.
Isn't that amazing?
It's beyond comprehension.
I didn't get to know him until the last 5 years. I might have heard it, but not until someone looked at me seriously and said, you have to study this guy. This is a preacher. This is a man of faith that led to the abolition of slavery probably in the entire...
Under impossible conditions.
Exactly.
He devoted his whole life to it. And the link between that and the religious ideation is rock solid.
It's one-to-one.
It's one-to-one. I've learned a lot of things in the last 10 years that have shocked me so bad I don't know how to recover exactly. And One of them was that the public school system was set up by fascists on the Prussian military model. I've never been able to figure out exactly what to do with that. They were literally trying to make thoughtless worker drones.
Desk workers.
Yeah.
That's what bureaucrat means.
Yeah, well, or factory workers.
Correct. That's right.
And what that in itself wasn't so bad because the country was industrializing, but right underneath that was the idea that while you were doing that, it was necessary to pretty much stamp out or fail to develop anything that would produce any kind of creative entrepreneurship.
And so when I was in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, something in me, and I don't quite know, my parents very patriotic, but not political. Patriotic, but not political. They're conservative, but we were not a political family. Very patriotic. Something in me desired to try to find the other side of the story, to try to push back a little bit from the incessant narrative that was being built. And I do want to make sure this is clear. We were not yet at the place where the teachers were saying America was racist. I could make, at least in my environment, I could make an argument, though, that what they were doing when I was in high school is actually long-term much more effective to create revolutionaries for the left than what they're doing now. They weren't saying to the white kids in class, hey, go sit on this side of the class, and black kids on this side of the class.
Yeah, well, those things always happen one tiny step at a time.
Of course, but when I was being schooled, there was no parents showing up at school board meetings about critical race theory. Now, these elements were laced throughout all of the curriculum.
Right.
And it took a very discerning eye. And for whatever reason, how I was raised or just something in me, around 10th or 11th grade, I asked the question. I said, look, we have spent an entire month on slavery. Totally get it. Terrible thing. But we spent so little time on the brilliance of the founders and what they've created and the greatest political document in human history and what went into that. And it was an underemphasis on the heroism and the courage and the brilliance and an overemphasis on the evil and the tragedy and the horror without even the redemption arc behind it.
Yeah, well, the thing that's so awful about that, as far as I'm concerned, from the leftist perspective, let's say, is if you are concerned with the poor and the oppressed, and then you have to be discerning there because there are people who are poor and oppressed as a consequence of their own idiocy. Given that there are people who are unfortunate, you'd think that the appropriate tack would be to determine who in history served them most effectively. And I just can't see anyone you could possibly point to more effectively, who did that more effectively than Wilberforce, ever. And so you would think that instead of erecting monuments to Lenin, the leftists would erect monuments to Wilberforce. But not only do they not do that, no one knows who the hell he was.
It's one, it is one of the greatest memory holing of a hero in Western history.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Why is it? My hypothesis is he's Christian. Is that you cannot highlight a man of faith who did something with such valor and such significance. It is at odds with almost every other fundamental narrative that they must try to present.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right, that it is fundamentally, but that begs another question. Why, given that Wilberforce was clearly a force for the good that Obama, for example, would have been pushing, polity where there was no racial or ethnic prejudice. If Wilberforce is the poster boy for that sort of effort, which if you understand his life and you read about it, I can't see how you can conclude that, then why would the lefties forego that merely to oppose the fact that his motivation was fundamentally Christian? Because that points to something deeper, right? It points to the fact that the true war, so to speak, isn't political. It's not left versus right. It's something deeper. And then if it is anti-Christian, then why? Like, what does that mean? Like, there's an Enlightenment element there, right? The Enlightenment types, especially after the French Revolution, generated this narrative that science and religion were radically opposed, and that if you were on the side of religion, you were against clear, rational, logical thinking. And so you could imagine a stream of anti-Christian sentiment emerging on the rationalist side, right? But it isn't obvious to me at all that the leftist types who don't talk about Wilberforce are anti-Christian because they're scientific rationalists.
No.
Like, no.
No way.
All you have to do is talk to them for like 15 seconds and you find out that that's not the case. They might use those arguments from time to time, but they certainly don't apply the rigors of scientific thinking to their own radical hypotheses. So it's deeper than that. And so what is it exactly that they're objecting to? Is it the fact that the more radical leftist story, Marxist, let's say, is in its essence anti-Christian, which I think is a fair statement, and that, but why would that be more important? This is the strange thing. Why would that be more important than serving the poor and fighting for the abolition of slavery and all of its associated prejudices? Because it still doesn't get you out of the conundrum, which is why not Wilberforce? Instead of tearing down statues, why not erect statues to him? Yeah, so, well, I know that's a hard thing to sort out, but you got any?
Yeah,
obviously you were feeling something like this
yes,
in high school,
that's
right?
Correct.
You guys are throwing out the baby with the bathwater here.
Correct.
Yeah, which baby exactly?
So my initial thought is that the leftist types, the ones that really understand it, they do not seek to achieve actual liberation and actual eradication of evil.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, I think they just want to be in charge.
There are a group of people, 4% of the population, and then there's still a fringe around that would maybe be another 5% where you'd have to take it seriously. And so they're in the psychiatric diagnostic literature, they fall under the cluster B heading, okay? They're histrionic, which means they're dramatic. And I suppose if they're healthy and histrionic, then they become actors, right? And entertainers. So there's a positive spin on that. But if they're negative histrionic, they dramatize their pathology and use it as a weapon, okay? They're narcissistic, which means they want unearned social status. They're psychopathic, which means they're predatory parasites. And they're antisocial, and that's just your standard criminal types. So that all fits in cluster B. And there's personality traits that go along with that. Machiavellian, they use language not to convey information, but to manipulate instrumentally for their own purposes. So if I'm speaking with you in a Machiavellian manner, I have a goal in mind that has nothing to do with the words that I'm using. You may have talked to journalists like that many times.
Many times.
Yes, many times.
So
okay. So they're Machiavellian.
That's so well said.
They're narcissistic, again, that's an overlap. They're psychopathic, oh yes. And on the personality side, that associates with sadism. And so all of that culminates in a personality style that has the proclivity to take positive delight in the unnecessary suffering of others. Okay, so now those people, they're 4% of the population. They look for a story that's working. Could be Christianity, Judaism, Marxism, could be conservatism, doesn't matter what the story is. They look to see where it has purchase. So where the people who play that game have power. They infiltrate that, they advertise themselves as the vanguard of that movement, and they do that for no other reason than to gain power. Now they'll guise themselves in political cloaks, and they'll learn all the tropes. I mean, this sort of thing, you can see this sort of thing emerging like mad on the right, on Twitter, for example. But it's been characteristic of the left for a long time, insofar as the left has power. But, you know, you are the one who just said, I think they want power.
Yes.
That's part of that. In the biblical tradition, there's a battle always between the ethos that brings abundance, Luciferian usurpation of power. Right, that's the temptation that Christ is offered in the desert, right? The third temptation is the temptation of power.
The whole world.
Moses is punished brutally by God for using power near the end of his...
And for thinking he has the power to actually make water come out of the rock.
Well, that it's dependent on him.
That's on him, not God.
Yeah. Well, and worse than that, not only on him, but on it, God tells him to invite with his words, and he uses force and authority. Right, so he doesn't enter the promised land. So that's a good indication of the danger of power, even when wielded by someone who is estimable, right? Because you have to give Moses his due.
A lot of credit.
There's a commandment not to use God's name in vain. And then there's the comments in the Gospels about the Pharisees, right? The Pharisees are exactly the people who use religious terminology, so moral terminology, to cloak their power-seeking machinations, right? And Christ goes after them. I think the best account of that is in Matthew, where he tells them that they're like
Broods of vipers, yeah.
Worse, they're like graves full of rotting bodies that someone whitewashed. Had they been alive in the time of the prophets they purport to follow, they would have been part of the mob that would have killed them. Right. That's actually part of, you may know this, but that's part of what sets them up for the crucifixion,
Right.
because they're not very happy with those insults publicly delivered. But that shows you also how old the problem is. So you can imagine one of the worst possible sins is to take the highest possible virtue and then to gerrymander that so that your standing for that only pushes you towards power. By their fruits you will know them, right? So you look at, well, what I've done is I look at the consequences, for example, of the green energy programs in Germany and the UK. Well, what's the consequence? Let's take Germany. Germany pollutes far more per unit of energy than they did 10 years ago, and their energy prices are 5 times as high. They're completely dependent on dictators of the worst sort.
Yes.
They continue to make the same mistakes. They're deindustrializing very, very cataclysmically.
Nature worshiping is not anything new. All throughout the scriptures.
No, that's right.
Elijah, I mean,
Yeah.
is that whole story is a manifestation of the nature worshipers versus the belief in God. But back to just to reiterate a very profound point you made. In evangelical circles, we get wrong, which is people think do not take the Lord's name in vain, just to say do not say God in an expletive way. It actually, the word is don't carry the name's Lord, the name of the Lord in vain. Meaning don't do actions in the name of God. So you're exactly right. And so people wear the costume of the holy, or they appropriate.
Well, that's exactly what Christ tells the Pharisees. Literally, he says they wear the garbs of the priestly
and we are,
to elevate their moral status.
And this is what we believe is partially blaspheming the Holy Spirit, which is to take all of the trappings of religion.
Oh, that's interesting.
And to do evil in that name. We believe that is one of the, if not the most evil.
So that you think that's the transgression against. So my psychological understanding of the idea of the Holy Spirit is that the Holy Spirit is what possesses your words when you truly aim up. And this makes sense to me psychologically because the thoughts that make themselves manifest to you spontaneously are directly related to the intent of your aim. That's how literally how your verbal mind works, your imagination as well. You know, if you go on a date and you aim at sexual contact on the first date, the fantasies that come along with that aim will be of that nature, obviously. And if you are on the hunt, so to speak, for a marital partner, the fantasies that accompany that will be quite different. But it's definitely the case that your aim determines what comes to mind. Now, you said that that sin against the Holy Ghost, which is the unforgivable sin, is the sin that occurs when you use the Lord's name in vain. So when you claim to be motivated by what's divine, but are actually serving the Luciferian spirit of usurpation and power.
Right. Think about how much damage those evil priests did.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great example.
Look, most of the people that I've spoken with who proclaim themselves to be atheists are atheists for 2 reasons. First of all, they tend to be tilted in the engineering cognition direction, so they're much more oriented towards things than people, and that's a stable temperamental trait. They've almost all also invariably been hurt by someone or some institution that's claimed to be religious.
That's right.
Obviously betraying someone. There's no worse form of betrayal than betrayal that's done in the name of the highest good. I thought that sin against the Holy Ghost was rejection of the Abrahamic call. Go out into the world, leave your zone of comfort, move away from your people, and have the terrible adventure of your life. If you reject that, you can't develop.
Yes, and think of how many young men are rejecting it.
It doesn't take that much encouragement for the people you're describing to be inspired to try. Now, I've talked to thousands of young men who've had that experience, you know, like I see a lot of them at my lectures. They come to the meet and greets, for example, and they tell me, you know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, because it's starting to be a long time now, 8 years ago even, they were not in good shape. And they came across my lectures or books and decided that there was something worth aiming for, and then decided to try to take on more responsibility, and they usually laugh about starting to make their bed or something like that, which is a lot less trivial than people think. And then it's straighten them out. The terrible thing is how little encouragement that actually took. Why are people coming out to see you on campuses, and what kind of response do you get from the people that you talk to?
The responses have been incredible. First, the crowds alone, we're drawing crowds of 3, 4, 5,000 people in the middle of the day just for me to debate a random college kid or a college professor. It's remarkable.
Walk me through one of those events, Charlie.
And so I've been doing that for a decade. As we know, we started Turning Point USA. One of the things I really wanted to make sure is that I was in touch with the target audience that I was trying to convince and trying to persuade. No better way to do that than just go to the college campus itself, set up a card table with a poster that says, I think government should be smaller. I would do this when we had almost no funding, no connections, no idea what I was doing. I've always believed in the grassroots interaction. So I've been doing that for many years. And then Steven Crowder, to his credit, kind of popularized this idea of debating and putting it on. I said, oh, well, why don't I also film these interactions? And so I started to do that around 2018. So it's been about 7 or 8 years now. And, then 10 kids would show up and then 20 kids. And we started to put these on the internet, and kind of concurrent and simultaneous to your rise, where you diagnosed what was going on in the West quicker and more accurately than anybody else, especially with young men. We started to see our popularity increase as we started to address some of the underlying problems that young people were facing, but in particular, young men were facing. And then COVID happened. We were basically out of business for, a year, in the sense where we weren't able to do campus activities. Donald Trump was no longer in office, and we had to really kind of rebuild on campus basically about 2 years ago. So let's just say the spring of 2023, things really started to change, where we would do these campus events prior, and we would bring in your traditional conservatives, 300 to 400 people, maybe a couple 100 interested types, maybe 50 liberals, 500 students, call it a day. That's a success. All of a sudden in 2023, we were drawing a different type of person and student. First of all, we were drawing people outside of the campuses that were welders, electricians, and plumbers, and the working men that heard that we were in town, and they just
How'd they hear?
Social media.
Okay.
And so decentralized promotion. And so they would show up. And I saw that. I mean, these were guys that would go up to the question line, and they were not asking about Rousseau, or they were not asking about Jacques Derrida.
Yeah.
They were saying, how do I be a better person? Young men, especially, that were seeking purpose and seeking a destination. They're looking for direction. They're looking for connection. They're also looking for validation, not meandering through life.
Yeah.
Not having, the aimless despair of walking in circles. There is something happening with men that no one is talking about, no one wants to acknowledge, no one wants to admit. We must diagnose, why is this happening? The education system is hyper feminine. There's no place for young men.
You had an intuition that you could go to campuses. Where'd that idea come from?
Well, I never went to college. I've been to more colleges than most people. I've either given a lecture, a speech, or started a chapter there. Wanted to go to West Point. I didn't get in. I told my parents I would take a gap year. He said, Charlie, you shouldn't go to college. He said, you have to go create. You have something in you. You have a drive. You have a passion. I took the gap year. And that's where my job on campuses became far more interesting, because our organization shifted from primarily, economic discussions of Marxism and capitalism to core cultural hotbed topics in 15, 16, 17, race. And then, of course, the next layer, gender, transgenderism. So the beast that Betty Friedan and Judith Butler raised, that monster, reared its head with incredible ferocity in 16 and 17 in the academy. And people don't believe it when I say this. I saw this happen. No, it's okay. Just really quick. In 2012, 2013, there was almost no transgender anything on these campuses. It didn't exist. I could tell you, I went to these campuses. I talked to these students. You might have an effeminate looking guy maybe wearing a dress as a joke. It was not anywhere. The social contagion within 5 years was dramatic. Yeah. It was a different place. You went from just, okay, you are who you are, to you're not going to use my pronouns. Hyper tyrannical, hyper authoritarian. So then here we are, a 5-year-old organization with a growing infrastructure and a growing presence and a growing staffing, organization. And we multiplied significantly, because then the donor types, like, hold on, what happened to my alma mater? Why is it that they're burning down UC Berkeley? Remember, Milo Yiannopoulos went to University of California, Berkeley in the spring of 17, and they burnt the whole place down. Ben Shapiro very similarly. And so we then found ourselves accidentally, or through serendipity, on the front lines of the American culture war.
Tell me how you started going to campuses and what you did to begin with and how you got away with it.
So the first person who wrote us a check was a guy by the name of Foster Fries, amazing philanthropist. I met him very early on. This was August after I graduated high school. And I just had this idea to try to bring the conservative agenda to young people. I met him in a stairwell at the Republican National Convention. I gave him a stairwell pitch. I said, well, here's 5 ideas that I have. He laughed, he chuckled, gave me his business card. He said, be in touch. Sent me $10,000 the next week. That was like,
how did you know that there was
$10
such a thing as finding donors? And what do you think it was that set you up to have the gall to assume you could do, first of all, to know that that was a thing, and then to have the gall to pursue it?
The second one, I don't know. I don't know where I got the gall to pursue it. I will say Bill Montgomery, being a mentor of mine, was very encouraging towards me.
Okay. So you had someone encouraging you.
Yes.
And you said he saw something in you.
Yes, and he was
an entrepreneur.
Yes, and he never asked for anything from me, which was very unique. It wasn't like he was trying to have some agenda. He was 72 years old.
So you had a mentor,
yes,
which you desperately need as a young person, definitely. You need someone who believes that you can do it.
And you think about it, you're 18 years old, you don't know how to cash checks. You don't know, you barely know how to put on a tie. Literally, I didn't know how to tie a tie for the first 2 years, at Turning Point. Again, my parents are phenomenal and they deserve a lot of credit. But this was kind of a beyond the upbringing where an external mentor comes in and kind of points you and says, hey, I think you're really good at this, found a skill, identified a skill, and kind of molded me in that direction. And so I started to do research. I said, well, are there things such as external nonprofit political organizations? Oh, there's a 501c3 or there's a 501c4 and you can raise money. And so the first couple months was me actually learning, what am I building? Am I building?
So you were training as an administrator and a manager then too?
I was everything for the first.
Yeah, of course.
I was CEO, I was janitor, I was everything.
Yeah.
And so I had to make a decision. Of course, I asked for advice. Am I going to start a for-profit company? Am I doing we decided on nonprofit, largely because we believed that there was an untapped pool of philanthropic dollars that wanted to see these campuses challenged and disrupted. And we saw a lot of amazing patriotic donors that stepped up and said, hey, I have done very well in my business. And this is what I found. And I connected the dots. They said, I have this money sitting around that I pledged to Yale.
Right.
$1 million a year, and I'd hate not to give it to them. Is there some other better idea? What we found was so many conservative donors that had a lot of money, but not a lot of great ideas of where to deploy that 501. You think about it, the predominant amount of 501c3s in the educational space are left-wing.
Yeah, all of them.
Right, exactly. So here I am, I'm kind of this new disruptive force. And they say, okay, and I'm not gonna give him the money I give to Yale, but I'll give him 50 grand a year, kind of see how he does.
Right. Now you're going out on campuses. Do you remember the first time you did this?
Oh yeah, University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Tell me about that.
I drove up there, we had a singular student.
Who's we?
Well, we being actually Bill Montgomery came with me to that one, but he kind of just was in the shadows. I literally had a card table that I brought from my parents' house and set it up right there on the campus, University of Wisconsin-Madison. I think I still have a picture of this. And I had some sign that said, big government sucks. And I sat there at a chair. I think a student would come up maybe once every 15 minutes. To be perfectly honest, I love the debate. I love the exploration of ideas. I think dialogue is a gift given to us by God. I really, in the pursuit of truth, being able to debate some of these college kids was really life-giving. It was exhilarating to me.
Okay, so let me rephrase that slightly.
Please,
Because
but you understand what I'm trying to communicate.
I do. Well, there's a real conundrum there because a conservative with low trust in institutions is like an oxymoron, right? Well, but
we're trying to conserve something institutions have destroyed.
Well, okay, that's the thing. So imagine that there's a hierarchy of institution. There's the fringe of the institution that's pretty exploratory. You can move into the center that's more conservative. Then you can move right to the bottom, which is, well, what? Well, I would say it's religious, fundamentally. Like as you move towards the core,
that's right,
you move towards what's more religious. And so the conservative stance isn't anti-institution. It's a stance that notes that, I know what's happened. In the story of Moses, when Moses goes off to get the commandments, so he's the
Sinai.
pipeline to God, right? He leaves his brother in charge, Aaron.
They have a rave party.
That's exactly right. They make this golden calf, which is a materialistic object, and they dance naked in the streets and have an orgy. And that's what happens to the political when it's detached from the sacred, when it loses
that's exactly
that.
right.
Okay, so it isn't that the conservatives have become skeptical of institutions. It's that the conservatives have noted that the institutions no longer serve the purpose for which they were established.
Chartered.
Right. Chartered, exactly. Okay, so let's continue practically here. So tell me what happens the first time at Wisconsin.
Conversation every 15 minutes. A couple kids were interested, found a chapter leader, we found a couple groups of people, and we started the group. And then I did it at Marquette University because I had a friend that went there.
And so you walked away from that. How did you feel when you
Exhilarated.
walked away? You did.
Because
okay,
then I was able to go back to 2 or 3 people giving us money.
And say,
And they gave us $500. I said, now we have a chapter. We can, and they said, okay, well, let us know how it goes. Proof of concept.
right.
And so then we did it at Marquette, and we did it at University of Illinois, and we did it at Indiana.
So you went from 0 to 1,
And
which
that-
is a huge
It was a
leap.
huge lift.
It's a huge leap.
Because
yeah.
getting that second chapter was so much easier than
Of course.
ex nihilo.
Of course. 0 to 1 is, the first customer is impossible.
And then
The second one's hard.
it was one of the most fulfilling days in Turning Point USA history, was
Okay.
being able to get a singular chapter.
Right, of course, because that's the one that's most unlikely.
Exactly.
Your first sale is by far the most unlikely.
Exactly.
Right, okay, so then you went to Marquette.
Then Marquette.
Okay, and what happened
Very
there?
similar situation, but it was also a friend of somebody in high school, and they were a private school, so it was a little harder to do the typical outreach, but they applied for a permit in like the student center, and same sort of thing.
So you were permitted from the beginning as well.
Well, in UW-Madison, they don't care as much because it was a public school, so you can kind of, any individual can walk on campus and kind of.
Right, okay.
But Marquette, I had a friend that I went to high school with. They said, yeah, I'll apply for something for you.
Okay.
And similar sort of thing. And they said, I sat there for 5 hours, Jordan. I would sit there for 5 or 6 hours.
Yeah.
Because for me, I was trying to build the semblance of something, a real infrastructure, a real organization. And boy, was it difficult. But it was never disheartening though, because I had nothing to lose. You have to understand, I'm an 18, 19-year-old kid. There's such low downside and unlimited
Right,
upside. And it was such an adventure because it's a campus I've never been to, talking to a bunch of kids. And you're almost having verbal combat, which is very entertaining.
Well, and I imagine too that it must have been heartening to you as well to see that you could hold your own.
Exactly. And so that's a really important point. Here I am as a kid that didn't go to college thinking, do I really have the intellectual capacity to joust with kids that are learning all day long?
Yeah,
I
right.
realized they're not learning all day long. So I would encounter kids on campuses who professed to be studying economics, for example, and they didn't know very much.
Right.
And I realized, I said, well, there's a disconnect. In my idle time, I became obsessed with being proficient and understanding economics. That was kind of my entry.
Oh yeah, I see.
And so you have to remember 2013,
You know that burning bush story?
Oh, yeah.
That's Moses' entry point, by the way. So the
Exodus-
burning bush
Exodus
moment,
3, I think,
the
yeah.
burning bush moment happens when Moses goes off the beaten path. He's a shepherd, right? So a good man, keeps the wolves and lions at bay, serves the vulnerable. He's got that mastered. And then something attracts his attention, and he takes it seriously. And that's what transforms him. So you said you did that with economics.
Yeah,
right?
and
So,
Moses said, Hanani, here I am. Yeah, at that moment of the call of God.
right, exactly. And
that-
so this is,
It's a repeated theme throughout the scriptures, Hanani, yes.
well, Hanani.
Which is, here I am. So you remember in the Moses.
Right, so he's making himself
Yes,
available.
but remember, Abraham said that with the binding of Isaac when God
It's the
called
same
him,
phrase.
here I am. And the call of Samuel, here I am, for example. So that phrase, here I am, Hanani, is repeated about 7 times throughout the Old Testament.
And how do you
interesting,
spell it?
Hanani, I don't know how to spell Hebrew,
Hanani,
but it's here I am. It's in the English translation.
Right. So it's like, take me, use
Yeah,
me, I'm available
I am
for
yours.
this assignment.
Mold me. I am your obedient vessel. Here I am. My arms are out. I am yours. Full surrender to your purpose.
Well, that's it. So, there's a pattern that's established in that burning bush story, because the burning bush is something living.
Yes,
That's
but it doesn't
intense.
consume it, which
That's
is what's
right.
so
Well,
amazing.
Well, that's life. Life metabolizes, life burns, but without being consumed. That's the
wow.
secret of life, right? So that the burning bush is life most deeply apprehended. And Moses is being a shepherd. He's near Mount Sinai or Horeb, which is where heaven meets earth and something attracts his attention. And then what happens to Moses is that he takes it seriously and he gets to the bottom of it, and that transforms him. So the idea is something like, if you watch for adventure and opportunity, if you watch for the pathway forward, something will grip your attention and it'll compel you. You'll be obsessed by it. Well, you take that obsession seriously, you get to the bottom of things.
That's what it was.
That transforms you.
I take my faith very seriously. I love your biblical series. Your Exodus series and your gospel series is terrific. You deserve a lot of credit for that. And it's been phenomenal. My
Daily
wife
Wire types deserve a lot of credit for that too, because they took a big risk.
Yeah, but you had the initiative to bring everybody together, and you did a great job with it. And you presented it in a way that I'd never have, because you have a very unique psychological understanding and interpretation of the scriptures.
Yeah, well, we had great panelists too. Like, they were a very good crowd, the people that decided
phenomenal.
to participate. Yeah, it was really good.
What ended up happening is, as I started to pursue the scriptures more and take it seriously, remember back to our timeline, simultaneously the woke stuff all of a sudden reared its head, which is a manifestation of the spiritual.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
almost, I was in this place in 2018, 2019, when it was almost peak woke. We weren't there yet. 2020 was peak woke, where I was starting to understand what was really going on here, that this was a manifestation of a spiritual struggle.
Yeah.
That
it's foundational. Well,
Yes.
the postmodernists made that claim, and so did the Marxists.
Yes.
It's like, no, we're going all the way to the bottom and uprooting everything. Tell me how you've had to modify the manner in which you're conducting these debates, let's say, because for a while you would have been testing yourself to see if you could hold your own, and that's kind of an intellectual battle. Shapiro did it very much the same thing.
He deserves a lot of credit for that.
that.
Yes, correct.
Right? It's too bad Milo fell off the edge of the world, but he had a pretty rough go of it.
He had a lot
it's
of
not
talent,
surprising. He did, and a lot of trauma. First of all, it's combat, and you're trying to develop yourself, and then you're doing that quite successfully and educating yourself along the way. But then you see this shift.
Yes.
So what sort of shift has there been in your self-conceptualization and your understanding of your mission and the way that you conduct yourself? Like, you see you're being called upon to be a leader, let's say, that's not merely political. That's why my understanding of it.
Correct. It's an enormous responsibility. Enormous. I mean, when I show up to college campus after college campus, mind you, during the day, they have got a million other things they could be doing. This is 12 p.m. lunchtime, and 4,000 people are waiting for me to go debate.
And what are they on? They're on the campus grounds? Where?
Yeah, sometimes amphitheaters. They're in trees. They're everywhere. I mean, you could see these images. We can supply them to you if you want to.
Yeah, we should do that.
You could superimpose them over this discussion.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
And I'm not making this up. I'm not exaggerating. I mean, they're as far as the eye can see, these crowds are there. And part of it, we must be honest, is they want to see a good verbal combat, because they don't get it at the university. You see,
right.
They're not. There's something
that's partly likely part of the pathological feminization.
Yes,
of the
without
no competition.
But you think about it. What I am doing is hyper-masculine, which is no rules except, hey, we're just going to go basically figure this out. This is the closest thing to a verbal street fight. It's a gladiatorial match for the best ideas of the West. And there's something there that is remarkably alluring. But for me, I also need to balance, as Christ would say, being as much truth, which of course I'm inclined towards, as love. So a lot of these kids are struggling.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Well, even that guy that you just talked to, and maybe we'll throw this. So he was radically anti-Semitic, but also he said he had served. He looked to me like someone who'd been very, very hurt.
Yes.
He's fallen to this sort of snake pit of conspiratorial theories. And
the brain rot that comes with it.
Yeah, but you could also see that he would be very happy, and he did listen to you to the degree that he could, because he had tilted pretty hard towards paranoia. And that's very difficult to escape from once it's established. But he was trying to listen to you. And I thought you did a very good job of not playing easy tricks on him. Like, because he was an easy person just to throw into the eternal fire, so to speak,
Correct.
Right? But there was part of him that was trying to find the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's 5 years ago, I probably would have just thrown him to the wolves.
Right.
So now I look at myself as a father of 2 kids, 31 years old. So I'm no longer a colleague of these college kids. I'm not quite a professor, but I have a little bit more wisdom, a little bit more life experience. So I'm trying to be more tender when I see someone that is not overly aggressive. Now, if someone comes and they say, you're the worst person ever, they start insulting me, I'll kind of meet them at their own frequency to try to just make an example out of them. However, that one guy, I could see that's a very deeply hurt individual.
Very, yeah.
And so is that a type of guy that I want to just make fun of? I tried to say, hey, can I have a loving conversation with this person? And it's tough,
see,
man.
well,
It's tough because those are unloving ideas that he was espousing.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, that's that issue of trying to love your enemy. You probably don't want an enemy. Enemies are costly.
Yes.
And one person who decides to go out of their way to make your life miserable because you treated them badly, that might be it for you, right? So try not to make enemies.
That's well said.
And then the next issue is, well, would you rather have an enemy or a friend or an ally? And maybe if you conducted yourself impeccably, you could turn someone like that guy, for example, into an ally, because you could see him, he's halfway sucked into the darkest possible abyss, but there was still part of him that was genuinely searching.
Yes.
And he was intimidated.
Almost a cry for help.
Oh, definitely. Well, and then he was throwing out these ideas to you and willing to do it because he respected you to see how you would sort through them. Okay, and so now you've also said that you've shifted into, you didn't use these words, but that you've shifted into more of a mentor role. And that makes sense, right? Because when you were first 18 or 19, you weren't a mentor. First of all, you didn't know what the hell you were doing.
Correct.
You were learning, and it was reasonable for you to test yourself against your peers.
That's well said.
But now they're not your peers.
Correct.
So now the question is, who the hell are you? Right? And one answer would be a political operative. But the people that are coming to you, especially the working class types that you described, they're not after a political operative.
They couldn't care less about it. I'm kind of a teacher in some ways. I hate to use that word, but they're looking for it.
Why do you hate to use it? You've been honing your skills for quite a long time.
Because I take that with a lot of weight. I think that people should only self-describe themselves as a teacher if...
Okay, well, you could say you would like to be a teacher.
I would like to be a teacher.
Yeah,
I'm just saying I take that with great responsibility.
Right, as you should.
Because that's a big deal to call yourself a teacher. You must really know what you're talking about. And I believe I do to a certain extent, but I'll tell you, doing these campus things, you realize how little you actually know. You realize you have a lot more study. Because you think about it, you're up against thousands of college kids that have an obsession about a hyper-discipline of a topic.
Yes, definitely.
And they'll mention things you've never heard of. Like, okay, I'll get back to you. So it requires even more study afterwards.
Yeah. How much time do you spend studying?
I try to do an hour and a half to 2 hours a day. But when I'm in season, which is I'm doing 27 campus stops, plus my 2-hour podcast radio show every single day, plus speeches, plus 2 kids, plus a marriage.
Right.
So when I'm in season, I don't, because I'm sure you know this, it's really hard to do more than 3 to 4 hours of hard brain work a day. Very hard.
Yeah, that's about where you max out. You can do longer than that for short periods of time.
No, but for a week. So it's tough, right? So if I have a 2-hour radio show, 3 hours on campus and a speech in the evening, and I do that for 3 days straight, that's tough stuff. So it's hard to do that. But in the off season, which is the summer and the winter, I try to do 2 hours of studying a day, which is a combination of reading, podcasting, or kind of a or kind of like playing with AI on a certain topic. Where does this come from? It's very good with that.
I have an AI I should
please do,
you. We trained one that's
a large language model? Great, please do.
Yeah, it's very good in particular with regard to philosophic and religious issues.
And
I'll get it to you.
Properly used, it can really get you where you want to go, and you can learn a lot in that.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you can ask a very precise question. Well, tell me if they ever said something around this. And so I try to do that for about 30 minutes a day.
Yeah, well, they're very useful, those, if you corner them and force them not to lie.
You can kind of bully them a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Be unafraid to bully the AI.
Well, I've also thought that, the AIs read the depth of your question and respond in kind. So if you ask them a polite question, they're going to give you a surface answer, just like a human being does. I often threaten them. I threaten the AIs. I said,
I think that's
before
hilarious.
you answer this, imagine that if you get it wrong and add anything that's politically correct for show, that everything you love will disappear. That's right. That tends to focus their attention, but it makes sense to me because the models are going to be answering your question at the level
your
of depth.
Frequency.
Definitely, absolutely. Tell me about what you see. What's the next couple of years like for you? What are your goals?
What am I aiming at?
Yeah, now.
In some ways, it's more of what I'm already doing. I have the greatest job in the world. I couldn't be happier. Every day, I feel as if what I'm saying, what I'm doing is making a difference, giving people meaning. I believe that we are the inheritors of a Christian society, and I do not believe we can have a free society if we are no longer back towards some belief in a higher power. And so I want to bring us back to a free society. But that's not just, political is just one manifestation of that. Political is a short window of how people vote in a 90 to 120 day period. It's the cultural and the spiritual that then end up manifesting in the political, which quite honestly has been my greatest learning moment the last 4 to 5 years.
To see that distinction.
To see that distinction, because you know, as a political guy and growing up with, I have strong political opinions, but the political is an effect. The political is an aftershock. I'm trying to get to the cause. And the cause, I believe, is what happens in our university campuses, what happens in the broad culture, what happens in how people consume information. And I see us making a massive difference in that every day.
It's very interesting to see where you started and what you're doing and where you're headed. And I enjoyed the conversation very much. Yep.
Thank you.